and welcome back to the Play It Forward podcast, the podcast presented by PeacePlayers, where we lift up voices and stories of people working in their communities and networks to promote peace and equity. I am Chinny Nwagbo, your host. Recently I've been going by Chineze Nwagbo, which is my full name. So we'll do that. Chineze Nwagbo, your host of the Play It Forward podcast. I am so excited to be here today. We have an exciting and amazing guest. But before we do that, we'll talk about what's going on today's episode. Today's episode, we will be speaking to our very special guest on sports, identity, and migration, how moving people changes places. Really, I want to say how moving people changes the world. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's show, yeah, he's looking over his shoulder because this show is not possible without my co-host and the most amazing man in the world, Emmett Shepard.
Hold for applause. And thank you. Wow. I already was obsessed with you in the first place, Chinny, and like had this deep-seated lust for you, but Chineze, that just throws the emotions up into the sky and into the stratosphere. Oh my God.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? I'm happy to have you here. It's always great.
I'm happy to be here. It's good to be back, honestly. I have my coffee. I'm feeling good. I got my nice sweater on because I thought, for this guest, I have to dress to the nines. I care clearly about fashion a lot. So I needed to try my best to do that. Hello, everyone. My name is Emmett Shepard. I am the co-host to the incredibly gifted Chineze Nwagbo.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm really happy to be here, honestly. It's been a minute, Chinny. We haven't recorded in a minute, but it's always a refreshing thing to hear your voice start my day.
Awesome.
But before I want you to introduce the guest, let us remind our listeners that you can follow us on Instagram at Play It Forward Podcast to find highlights, more behind the scenes footage of me and Chinny just doing mundane activities like cooking and doing laundry. I know you guys want to see that content. And if you could be a doll, rate our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify. We really enjoy the reviews. We read all of the comments that we get, and it really just warms our hearts.
It does.
Now,
it really does.
Thanks so much for doing so. Chinny, tell the people who we're talking to today.
All right. And I'm going to get this, hopefully I get this correct, but definitely bear with me here because many accolades requires a great read. So today's guest is the current CEO of a brand new venture called Jetter Global Partners. Jetter, I love that name, and provides comprehensive immigration solutions for elite athletes from around the world. He is the former senior director of international government affairs for the NBA, where he managed and advised all immigration matters for players, staff, and families of the NBA, WNBA, 2K, G League, and the Basketball African League. He started his professional career as a radio journalist in his hometown, Kansas, before moving to Washington, D.C., where he became the communications director and later chief of staff and campaign manager of our now U.S. Senator, Jerry Moran. Did I mention that he and I are I'm not going to say we're like best friends, but we're almost best friends is what I'm going to say. But no, in all seriousness, help me welcome Travis Murphy to the show. Welcome, Travis. You're amazing.
Welcome, Travis.
Thank you both. Wow, this is energy. I love it.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely.
and Travis, I imagine, growing up in Kansas and going to DC, you heard whispers of this, but I won't be offended if you haven't. But there's been whispers of sweet nothings in the wind throughout all of America about an icebreaker king. I don't know if it's a myth, if it's a lore. I didn't give myself this title. This was more so given to me by the masses. But the way we like to start this show is to just ask an icebreaker to, as we like to say, break the ice. It doesn't get any simpler than that.
There you go.
And today's icebreaker I want to ask you is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Wow, the icebreaker king. I'm flattered to
he is indeed
be able to partake right out of the gate here.
Yes.
Wow, that's a great question. We're gonna go deep here right out of the gate, but so I started my career in radio. Once upon a time, kind of fancied myself as a on-air personality, as I think your listeners will see over the course of the next 45 minutes. That's not the case. I went somewhere else in a different direction with my career. But early on in my career, I was covering local elections, essentially at 19, 20 years old, and was a bit daunted even going into a county courthouse in small town Kansas to be there and kind of cover the election results and report back. And the general manager of the radio station at the time, his advice was just, it's essentially, look, you belong there. You're there. You're a part of this organization, and you're there representing it. And people, you may not believe that you're supposed to be there, but you belong. And it was subtle. It was about a courthouse in Beloit, Kansas, but at the same time, that's something that's frankly resonated throughout my career. I like to say I've had a somewhat unexpected career to kind of come from the background I came from, and which didn't necessarily lend itself to having the opportunities I've had. But now today, kind of working in global sports, I think I still struggle to some extent with this this imposter syndrome, right? This idea like, do they know who I am? I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be in this room. But you belong. And I think with what we're doing here in terms of trying to open the world through sports, we're going to talk, I assume, about sports diplomacy. I've become a big believer and advocate for the work that it's done in that discipline. And I think it's important to remember that, not from an arrogant standpoint, there's obviously a fine line between humility and arrogance, but you belong there. If you're there, if you've earned the spot, then own it, be there, and do the best you can.
That's great.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mic drop. I really love, you're absolutely right. And I think, especially, and I can speak for myself as a Black woman, leaning into that confidence is so important. And knowing that you are where you are because you're supposed to be there is a key driver for me to really feel a part of the work that I'm doing. I love sports diplomacy, as you know. So it's important. I'm actually surprised that you even feel that way. The imposter syndrome is a deep one that a lot of people, they are not as vulnerable as you have been right now to share it with us. So that's, What about you, Emmett?
No, I mean, the imposter syndrome thing, I imagine also, Travis, it's like it's more of like sort of like a hill that you always have to climb up. It's never like that imposter syndrome goes away, I imagine. So is it you just go back to that day in Kansas going, okay, I just have to reiterate to myself that I've done the work, I've done the necessary steps to get to this place. I belong to be here, kind of thing. No, it's really important.
Absolutely. And it's coming into your own and recognizing, now I've kind of carved out this niche at this unique intersection, I think, of sports and diplomacy and governance and immigration. And, really over the course of the pandemic, have kind of become a resource, for the, working at the NBA, but for others in the sports industry, and recognizing there's an opportunity here to kind of coalesce and bring people together, and then harness and leverage that kind of collective power of sports leagues to advocate on behalf of the work that we're doing worldwide. Because really, and I think you see this a lot in our international work, with the NBA, where I've been for the last 6 years, we travel a lot, and obviously working in diplomacy before that. And I think that's an important thing to carry with you when, that, again, going back to that sense of humility, when you're sitting there, you're a diplomat in a foreign country, and you're working in the United States Embassy, and, your housing's taken care of and your car's taken care of. But yet you're going into these areas that, like my last overseas post was in Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa, of absolute abject poverty. So, but everybody deserves an opportunity, and everybody deserves a chance. And whether it be academics, whether it be athletics, whatever it may be, I think being able to encourage that and find those opportunities to say, yes, I may be in this position today, but I get it. I've maybe not been there, but I've been through a journey myself, and then using that to relate and to connect.
And also finding using your platform. Basically, at the end of the day, I always say this: using your platform to serve others. And so that being said, let's get right into the nitty gritty of our conversation today. And so for many of you, you may not know this, but the reason why I know Travis Murphy is that I'm a sports envoy. And Travis and I have worked together in the past on envoy projects, particularly the project in Tanzania, Africa, which changed my life. But these projects are hosted by the Department of State's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, a government sector created to help and foster mutual understanding of the United States and the people of other countries to promote friendly and peaceful relations. And so Travis and I had a chance to meet there. He was just a really great sounding board in terms of what to expect and how the NBA wanted to implement some of their programs and the language. And it was just nice to meet him and to continue to work with him after that. But Travis, you've already given us some insight to who you are and what you're doing and the intersectionality between sports diplomacy, international affairs. But let's go a little bit deeper and just we'd love to learn about your journey and how you got here, specifically about just your love for sports diplomacy. But go ahead, let us know. Kansas, DC, I want to hear the whole story.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chinny. It's I love the fact that now, 6-7 years after we first connected with you as a sports envoy and me as a program officer on the back end helping support the program to Tanzania, and then that we've stayed in contact and been able to kind of continue to intersect in each other's lives. So it's great to be on and be able to have this conversation with you today. In terms of my background, we've kind of touched on that growing up in Western Kansas, started my career in radio, and through that kind of an interest in politics grew. Like I said, I've had a very unexpected life, and it's been a lot of fun. But through the radio station job, I got to know my local congressman, came to Washington, which is where I am currently. DC's kind of been home most of my career in one capacity or another. And came here and was press secretary on Capitol Hill a few years ago. We'll just leave it at that. Eventually became the congressman's chief of staff. So, at 27, I was going back to this imposter syndrome. At 27, I was the chief of staff for a U.S. congressman and woefully unqualified for the job. But at the same time, had, a great rapport with him. I think kind of understood fundamentally what he was trying to accomplish and representing the people of Kansas, and kind of understood that heartland mentality. And then from there, I really wanted to I did that, and it's grueling, long days, long nights. It was a great way to spend my 20s, but was definitely ready for new challenges, new opportunities. I went back to grad school. So I'm a Wildcat, Kansas State for undergrad, and a Sun Devil, Arizona State for my graduate degree. After that, I came back, worked a bit in the state, helped him get ready for his run for the Senate, but really had this interest had been growing in wanting to expand. I felt like I had traveled and understood government, but wanted to expand my horizons internationally. But was kind of past the point in my life where a 3-month backpacking trip through Europe made sense.
Right.
And so was trying to figure out a way to sustainably introduce myself, if you will, to more of an international stage. And then, but also, at that point, public service had really kind of ingrained itself in me. And I wanted to figure out a way, is it the Peace Corps? Is it USAID? Is it working for an NGO? Like, what makes sense? And actually pursued a Peace Corps tour, but, ultimately that didn't work out. And then took the Foreign Service exam, and it's an extensive process, a written exam, and then a series of essay questions that are judged, then an oral exam all day, Washington, D.C., and then I passed and got into the Foreign Service. Yeah. And so joined at the beginning of the Obama administration in 2009. So kind of came in with, a fresh look at diplomacy in the aftermath of 9/11, even then, the Bush administration, wars ongoing in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so it was a really interesting time to kind of come into foreign policy and be introduced into that world. And then, through the Foreign Service, I spent a full tour in Ecuador. I did what we call a long-term TDY, a temporary duty assignment to Suriname, learned a full course of Spanish, learned a full course of French, And then did an overseas tour in Cote d'Ivoire, was there for almost 3 years. And then that takes us back around to a domestic tour in which I served in the Office of Sports Diplomacy.
Ooh, sports landed right in your lap. Woo-hoo.
There you go.
God.
There you go.
Very nice.
Travis, is radio still something, before I ask, dive into, diplomacy and immigration more so specifically, but radio for you, is there still sort of this ember of connectivity you have with radio, or has it been like so far removed at this point that you're kind of like been there and it's a nostalgic memory at this point?
I'm not gonna lie, Emmett. Like when I get in this setting, like I am right now, like there's a little bit more bass in my voice. Like it kind of turns back on.
Yeah.
I'm kind of back in the control room, looking out the window. There's the thermometer, 73 degrees here. Kicks back in.
Right.
But you never is never like a moment where if like you're listening to a game or trying to like you turn NPR, you never like seek it out ever, kind of, because it is sort of radio in a sense, is sort of, especially amongst young people, not a lot of young people listen to radio anymore. Is there still that sort of like nostalgia piece that you want to hold on to, or is it moved on kind of for you?
No, it's funny, during the pandemic, like so many of us, was kind of going through boxes and digging out the attic and like, what's in this, and came across a number of, I'll date myself a little bit, cassettes, like air check cassettes and things like that. And so found a digitization company. And it's funny, I have the very first interview I did with Jerry Moran, who, he's been in my life now for 25 years. And so I have the very first interview I did with him, and it is abhorrent. It is terrible. Right. I now have that saved for posterity. Again, just like, those little reminders of where you came from.
Yeah. Our youth audience is looking up cassette. Is that a band? Like
right. I've never heard of them before. Yeah.
Sorry, Chinny, I want to like give our audience sort of like an opportunity to sort of, because I think immigration, diplomacy, these words, they're pretty big. There tend to be like, I think, associated with pretty dry material, like a lot of reading and just words and sitting in a room. But I think it's a lot more colorful and a lot more integrated. And like you said, I don't think most people knew that people go on tour to all these amazing places and do stuff like that. So for our audience, can you sort of give us like a small crash course in terms of what is it that you're actually doing on the ground, and specifically in that sports diplomacy kind of realm kind of thing for them? Because like people hear these words and they don't really understand what they mean to some degree.
Means. Yeah.
But Chinny, I feel like you could take that question better than I.
Yeah. I know I can, but I don't.
It's also for me. I'm saying no, kids, but I'm just talking about myself in this case. Like, what does diplomacy mean actually?
Okay. I can say a little bit about what I know, and then Travis, just if you want, just come and fill in the gaps, because I know you do it from a different angle than I do. But sports diplomacy, from my angle as the athlete, is just using your platform to serve something greater than yourself. And so we're in these countries. So with the Department of State, the work that I do is I'm traveling to these different countries, and we're working with the U.S., the different embassies there to promote peace, to promote leadership and teamwork, to really lean into the girls and women's empowerment, and create safe places for kids with disabilities to play. And sports, basketball, in my area, is just a small piece of that work. And so we go into these countries, and in Tanzania, for example, I was working with the Maasai tribe of Tanzania. And why this work was important was because the government has passed a law to end underage marriage for girls. And so what was unique about our work is that we were working with this school, this I guess it's a charter school that was created in the middle of this village for these young girls to come to school. And the direct link here is, if they got their education, they were given another chance at life. They could go and study in different universities, and they could break through the shackles of underage marriage. Although the government had passed this law to eradicate it, it was still very heavily practiced. And so you had this little school with about 250 girls were there, and we're hosting basketball camps because basketball was a ticket out of underage marriage. And so that's the kind of work we do. the kind of work you go and you go, oh, you're crying every day because you're like,
Yeah.
you're it's not because you're changing their lives, but they're changing your life, and you're like, oh my, and you see the direct impact that sports has on anyone's life, and how it can change the world, hence our title. How so that's my work from my angle. But
That's
Travis, please.
fantastic. I don't know if I can add anything to that. I mean, but from a programmatic standpoint, or just the management of these programs, I think the Department of State feels and recognizes that sports is a universal language, right? It has the ability, a unique ability, to bring people together from diverse groups and ethnicities and languages and religions, and sports transcends, right?
Exactly.
And there's all of these sort of inherent characteristics to sports. I mean, you have peaceful conflict resolution, you have empowerment, you have respect for diversity, all those things you touched on, Chinny. And even just like leadership and individual growth. And then, working for the NBA, so making that transition from the Department of State as a diplomat, where that essentially was our mission abroad, was to reach, I was a public diplomacy officer. There's different areas in which you can work in the Foreign Service. So I was more in kind of the outreach, media relations, cultural diplomacy track. And so through that, I did a lot of work using baseball, softball, soccer, and basketball, different sports to clinics and camps when I was a diplomat, and really saw how just effective it was. Because you get a line of kids right on the edge of a field or a pitch, and they're all kind of shifting nervously back and forth, foot to foot, giggling, and then you bring out the balls, and then everybody, it's just this equalizer that tears down the nervousness and the anxiety just in a way that few other things has the ability to do.
Yeah. And I think Emmett does a great job of saying this when he says, because this is what our show does, but we provide the space to have and feel comfortable to have these uncomfortable conversations. He says it much more articulately, but I screwed that up. But yeah, that's what sports does. And so, I mean, I hope it answers your question. Does that?
Oh, it does. It does. It was for the youth. It was for our youth listeners. It wasn't for me. But yeah, for sure. No, thank you both for that. Because I think it is, immigration, especially, and just like going into new countries with like PeacePlayers, for example, with historically conflicted divides, you're already in this really charged emotional state that you're being thrown into, and how do you navigate both bringing people together, but also making sure that you sort of balance that tightrope a lot of the time, because you are still that foreigner, and how do you build that trust in a way that's conducive to everybody, and is a really impressive thing that we do. I'm just saying PeacePlayers is impressive with what they do and what we all do.
Right.
Well said.
Travis, I'm curious, just talking about immigration. It's and I'm more so curious because it says you started, your public foreign, I don't want to butcher these names. You're saying all these different names. Public foreign policy, diplomacy. Which one should I say? With the Obama administration?
Just as a Foreign Service officer. In the Department of State. So kind of the legion of people who are posted abroad, working in the 275 embassies and consulates around the world, representing the United States to foreign audiences, but also serving as the face of the federal government, for those Americans who are living abroad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
To build peaceful
that
relations.
Makes sense.
Yeah. We want friends. We want allies. That's what we want.
Right.
Just in terms of immigration, for me, I think it plays a key role in expanding, sports and cultural diversity in the US. Yet, our country seems pretty divided as it relates to, labor and immigration issues and stuff like that. And, some American citizens are obviously very wary of newly arrived immigrants for countless reasons. So, what are your thoughts on immigration of athletes to immigration in general? In sort of the two relations.
It's a good question. And you're right. I mean, immigration has almost taken on a pejorative sort of connotation, right, as it's entered the political conversation, and it's very divided between the two sides in our country's political debate. But immigration, I mean, you can obviously go back to okay, globalization started post World War I or post World War II, when we recognized that through the power of working together as the international community, we could, commit ourselves to the greater good. You could argue it goes back to the formation of this country. That gets into a much obviously broader and deeper conversation. But I think in the near term, we talked about all of those things that are important to the utilization of sports as a tool to reach foreign audiences. I don't think there's any debate necessarily around the need to, project to the values of the United States, right, to foreign audiences. I think that's a positive. And whether you're coming at it from contribution to the pool of workers in our country, if you're looking at it from an economic perspective of investment in other countries and foreign investment in our country, if you're looking at it from a cultural perspective of bringing people together, and that the value it brings to our culture and our society by having a mix of people from other cultures and languages and ethnicities. I mean, immigration is fundamental to the existence of our global society.
Exactly.
Right. And
exactly.
Yeah. And then in terms of sports, there's no question that sports are more exciting, when you have a global talent pool that comes together and plays against each other. At the same time, that really is fundamental to sports diplomacy, in that it turns eyes and adoration and attention to the United States, which is ultimately what the Department of State is trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
And so, talking back now as somebody who worked at the NBA for years, and now in my current role with Jetter, it's talking about that. It's reminding people that sports transcends, sports goes beyond in a way that helps the Department of State accomplish its foreign policy goals. And so whether it's sending Chinny to Tanzania to work with children in the Maasai villages, one of the programs I worked on when I was in the sports diplomacy office was sending Shaquille O'Neal to Cuba.
Very cool.
Yeah, and just a country that has been isolated from so much of the world for 50, 60 years, to have somebody, of a personality of Shaquille O'Neal, and that, the thousands of lives that were touched by that visit. I mean, again, there's a separate conversation to have about the country's stance towards Cuba, right, from a geopolitical perspective. But I think that, the argument that, cultural diplomacy has been fundamental to our work abroad for more than 100 years. And it goes all the way back to, missionaries carrying the game of basketball abroad and using that as a tool to talk, bring people together, to bring kids together, to then, to talk about, their priorities. And so I think it's, we get caught up in this idea that, like, oh, immigration is a bad thing, or, immigration is a inherently political issue that's kind of taboo to talk about, when, the majority of immigration, if you will, is absolutely legal, is, 100% in compliance with the rules of the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and, largely beneficial to our country.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm getting really excited over here. I'm like, yes, especially the part about just immigration aids the global growth of sport. Like, if we diversify the world becomes better. And that being said, so I'm sure that Jetter Global Partners gets you really excited every day in the morning to know that you will be at the center of ensuring professional athletes and teams and leagues have the highest quality immigration guidance and support worldwide. And I'm like at the edge of my seat. But I think one of my biggest questions here is, how do you stay abreast of all the cultural policies of a country to equip your athletes with the knowledge on where they're going? Like factors like do you take things into consideration? Like, so one of the things that I was thinking about is when you send, if you have to send a gay athlete to the Philippines, or like in the World Cup during the Qatar human rights, that those violations that were being, that occurred, and how they were treating the workers based on the condition, like how they were sleeping and all those different things. And then we talk about, if we bring it to America, how you're educating your athletes on gun violence in America. Like, how do you stay on top of all that, just in your role?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, having the background that I do kind of, I think, gives me good perspective. I've kind of got the legislative background, having worked on Capitol Hill, foreign policy, and understanding of the Department of State. And then really my time at the NBA, for the 6 years I spent there was being a bit of a translator and interpreter, both between the NBA to better understand where the Department of State stood and kind of government speak, and like what was being said when something wasn't being said.
Right, exactly.
And then also going back to the Department of State and saying, look, here, the NBA is the world's most global league. 25% of our players were born outside the US. And what really sets the NBA apart, and I think was good training for me. So, comparing kind of major sports leagues, if you will, MLB, NHL, and 70% of NHL's players are from Canada. MLB has a significant percentage of its players that are born internationally, but they tend to be a bit more focused in kind of Caribbean, Central America, South America, Far Asia. What really sets the NBA apart, and what I was fortunate to be a part of, is this past season we had 40 countries represented in those 450 players. Right? It's such a small universe of players because there's only 15 guys on the 30 teams rosters, and 40 countries are represented there, including the United States. We had our first Portuguese player in the NBA this season, our first Colombian player on an NBA roster this past season, and it keeps growing. And then you look at the 3 MVP candidates, right? It was Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is from Greece via Nigeria. Shout out via Nigeria. You had Jokic, who is from Serbia, and then you had Joel Embiid, who's from Cameroon. And so all 3 of the MVP finalists were from other countries. Obviously, you've got people like Luka Doncic, who are coming up, from coming up in the league now, and a lot of other international guys. The draft is just around the corner for the NBA next season. A number of high-profile international players. So that just, I guess, there's a long way of answering your question to say, I wake up in the morning and I've got emails from Australia and the Philippines and Japan and China from overnight. And then, it kind of rolls with the clock over the course of the day, once
very cool.
Working on Asia, Africa's up, Europe's in their afternoon, and then, and then rolls through the country. And so it's cool because the job is so global in its scope that it kind of forces me to kind of constantly be reading, constantly be staying up on what's happening around the world.
Very nice. Very nice. Wow.
That
just gets me excited. I don't know. I'm just happy about that. That's awesome. Yeah. Way to be everywhere, but it just in one place. Like, just know everything about everything. You're probably great at trivia, but okay, another day.
Is that a portion of this podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
No, yeah, actually,
exactly.
The next part we're getting ready to go to. It's not. Oh yes, Travis.
He knows.
Okay.
He knows.
He knows.
Right, explain the lightning round for the people who don't know.
Okay. Well, welcome to the lightning round. As you know, Emmett
insert sound effects.
Not only is he our icebreaker king, but he's also our lightning round. I mean, I would just say
lightning round prince.
Champion.
Lightning round prince.
Yeah,
I don't have the full crown yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
And so, what you'll embark on here is you'll have Emmett will ask you a series of questions. You'll have 3 to 4 seconds to answer those questions. We do have a timer, and we will write down the most amazing answers, which is what we're expecting from you. No pressure. Emmett also has his famous line, which he will say now.
No, it's totally fine. Answer fully and honestly, and we'll judge you heavily with each answer. So it's good.
Yes, we will. And with that being said, Emmett, are you ready?
Yes, you got the clock ready and your pencils ready.
It. Let's do this. I'm excited.
Travis, are you ready?
I have no idea. Let's do it.
That's perfect. Okay. And here we go. Okay, bowling or mini golf?
Bowling.
Ooh. Flying or driving?
Flying. Gotta be international. Yeah,
absolutely.
Dry or humid?
Oh, dry, no doubt. Arizona. Give me that dry heat.
Right.
The book version or the movie version?
Book version.
Okay, AM or FM radio?
Ooh, can I sidebar on these, or do I have to? Are we still on the clock? We started.
Okay,
my first job was in an AM radio station, which was KFRM.
Okay. Shouts out KFRM. Shouts out KFRM.
All farm agriculture talk radio AM, And my grandfather, who lived like 4 hours away, would listen to me on the news every morning because it had this booming AM signal. So I have, you talk about nostalgia, Emmett. I have a bit of nostalgia for AM radio,
that's so nice.
which your younger listeners are even more saying, "What is AM radio?"
Is that a band?
Like AM,
is that do they
AM
open
in the
for
morning?
the cassettes? Do they open for the cassettes? Okay, are you a little bit country or a little bit rock and roll?
Rock and roll.
Okay. Yes. Good.
Summer or winter Olympics?
Summer.
All right. Okay.
Art museums or history museums?
Oh, that's a good one, right? Because you got the cultural diplomacy, the understanding of the world. I gotta go with history, though.
Right. Smart.
Shouts out to history museums.
Way to link it. Yep.
Okay, most underrated childhood game in your opinion?
Wow. Okay. I have great memories of Yahtzee, which, you learn how to count, you learn math. You also kind of learn how to play poker as a child. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Early onset gambling with Yahtzee.
Yeah, basically is what we need here. Bring it back. Bring it all back.
Which do you prefer? A horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? These are important questions that we need answers.
Wow.
We need to know these answers.
I have an almost 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so I'm trying to think about it from their perspective of like, what would be more useful to have around. I think tiny duck horses.
Tiny duck horses.
Yeah. A massage or an afternoon nap?
I'm not going to lie. I'm not good at sitting still. I often confuse busyness for productivity, but engage in both. So I'm not good at massages. I'm worse at naps. So that's honestly, of all these, even the duck horse one, this is a harder question for me. Let's go with a nap.
A nap, okay.
Okay.
Comedy or drama?
Comedy.
The last thing you taught someone else to do?
Again, I got to go back to the kids, right? Sports diplomacy starts at home, and I'm trying to get my daughter to ride a bike, and she refuses. So I don't know how this ties into the larger global audience, but I'll get there. Do it for the people. Do it for the
people.
The child refusal to ride a bike is so funny. Side tangent, just the idea that they always say, like, my sister, I was like this, my older brother was always like to our parents, we're never going to need to know how to ride a bike. You can't make us do this. And our parents were like, what are you talking about? Just like learn how to ride the bike. Everybody's going to ride a bike. Kind of thing.
I ride a bike a lot more than I do algebra.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. And lastly, Travis, what's one thing you want the listeners to remember from today?
Great question. I think, it's a big world, but people at the end of the day are what matters. And I think, we've strangely, in the way that, technology has spread, it's allowed a dehumanization that I don't think we really foresaw happening.
Right.
And I think the reminder that, and you see a lot of stories around kind of aggression, and just people have gone to some extent in kind of a bunker mentality in the pandemic. And as we come out, there's I think a lot of anger, a lot of mistrust, and certainly, our current political conversations, to some extent, foment that. But I just, working in this international space, Chinny, you've seen it on the ground. I mean, it just, people are human beings at the end of the day. So, diplomacy, like you said, can be kind of an abstract topic, but at the end of the day, it's just about connecting with another human being, no matter what they look like or where they're from. So I think that at the end of the day is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better, honestly.
That's
It's so crucial.
This is It's like for me, it's just so much deeper, because this conversation and everything that you're sharing today, Travis, kind of like it resonates deeply with me, because I played professionally for 11 years, and so like all your answers, I'm like yes, absolutely. Without trying to be too mushy about it, but yeah, no, thank you. You did a really great job.
You got through the
lightning
round. You're alive. You survived.
No, right. That
Clock
last
is
piece
stopped.
was like, I know. But yeah, that was awesome. I really like that you're a little bit rock and roll. All right, so we're gonna move right into our next question, and I have a question written down, but I think I just want to talk more about Jetter. and your new business. Primarily, I think I'm at the point, I told you, you already know this, I played professionally for 11 years and I've been trying to use my platform, to serve something greater than myself. And I know it's in sports diplomacy and I love what I do. And I love learning about different areas to plug myself in. And Travis, you and I had a one-on-one conversation about foreign service officer and different types of roles. But what I really enjoy is that I guess your job in a way talks about immigration assimilation, and it's a platform that expands the world in the way we think, and it's just through sports, something that everybody loves. And I just want to know, at what point in your career, when you're a foreign service officer or you're working with the NBA, and you say to yourself, you know what, let me do this for myself. Let me create this thing that I am well equipped to do. Let me throw away that imposter syndrome and do this on my own. I built the connections. I know people around the world. Like what happened? What made you go, it's time to do this?
Right. No, it's a great question. Thank you for asking that. It really, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it really was the pandemic, because I think, going back to what we were just talking about, there was this uptick in kind of fear of others, and it really was fundamental to, like, are they carrying an illness that could get me sick? And as a result, we had a lot of travel restrictions. We had a lot of policies that were instituted over the course of the pandemic that limited travel to the United States, and every country around the world did that, and it was necessary to try and control the spread of COVID. But at the same time, we were trying to figure out, and I think the NBA really was a leader in trying to figure out how to balance, okay, we have to be safe, we have to be healthy, we have to protect people, but we have to live our lives, right? And that was very much an evolution that took place for everybody as we tried to figure out, okay, do we go back to work? Do we, we're wearing masks when we're, just like how to navigate the space. And so, I'm kind of, being at the NBA, coming out of the government, and particularly coming from the Department of State, knowing people within Homeland Security, knowing people within the State Department that are, the overseers of our immigration policy, it put me at this space where I kind of had the knowledge of the latest that was going on. There was a process that was instituted that anybody coming from Europe and the European Union could not come into the United States without a waiver, which was called a national interest exemption. And it was, deemed by the previous administration and the current administration that professional sports or sports is in the national interest. Right. And so as a result of that, we had a waiver process through which athletes could get into the United States to essentially, work in their jobs, not just so they could play a game, because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Right. Sports is not just a game. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it exports US values and ideals globally. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. And so, sports, I think, played a unique role in, it basically, for people during the pandemic to find inspiration, to find unity, and stability, right? And I think it really showed how sports is a tool that brings people together, because we were able to follow those events even while we were sequestered in our homes. And so, basically, it was through that I started talking to other sports leagues, and I recognized that there was kind of this space of questions and confusion, and frankly, so it's answering questions back to sports entities that are trying to navigate what is a confusing global immigration landscape. But there's also an advocacy component here in Washington where I can sit down with colleagues, former colleagues from the Department of State and leadership there, with the Department of Homeland Security, within the government, to talk about what sports does, to talk about everything we're talking about here, right? Because it's not necessarily inherently understood. It's like, oh, it's just a game. We need to, and I think, we have to talk through that and beyond that to better explain how it really does play a role in serving the US population and the US government. And once you have that conversation, every time it's like, okay, I get it. You see those moments where it clicks. And so, the NBA has been an amazing place to work and kind of put me on a path to be able to expand my purview a little bit. in working with other leagues while still working back with the NBA. And then, as we look to the landscape that lies ahead for this country, you have the FIFA World Cup in 2026, which will be in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. You have the Summer Olympics in 2028, LA 28, potentially the Winter Olympics in 2030. Rugby World Cups, men and women, were both announced just here in the last couple of months. Will be here in I think 27 and 31. So there's these mega sporting events that are coming into the United States. And like you touched on what has transpired in Qatar in advance of this World Cup.
Exactly.
Here is an opportunity, I feel like, for the US to change the tenor of that conversation, to show how to do it right, to show how and why we are a leader in the world. And it's everything from, the immigration component, to do it from an environmentally kind of sustainable way, and building stadiums and creating the infrastructure for these events. And so there's so much. And then, you talk about the human rights. There's so many aspects to this that allows the United States to create a new paradigm, to shift that paradigm to okay, this is the way we do global sports moving forward. And I think there's an opportunity to be a part of that conversation, and I want to be there.
Wow.
I mean, it's
yeah,
it's so amazing. Important, because I think those things that you just listed are so not like unstable, but that they have so much weight to them. Human rights, environmental sustainability, gender equity, all of these things. And sort of, what does gender do specifically also? And then just and then immigration as well as another proponent of that. And like, when athletes do come, you mentioned this sort of space that's like, sports aren't forever. There has to be more of a foundational structure for these people when they come over, kind of, or vice versa. And it's specifically, I know I'm harping on immigration, but I'm just sort of focused in through that lens, partially just because that is super charged, either because of politics or other sort of entities that are feeding into that. But I think it's how do you establish stability and reassurance among those athletes and amongst yourselves, and sort of the game plan that you guys have when you know that you're sort of going into a world that is pretty subjective and unstable in a lot of different elements, depending on
whatever happens that day. Really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great question.
No, absolutely. Great question. Immigration, I think, like we said, has a connotation to it. I prefer global mobility. Although I think I mean, it's really about the ability to move around the world as an athlete, to participate in competitions. Right. I mean, the first official Summer Olympic Games is 1896, but I mean, it goes back thousands of years. Right. And so, even before, the 20th century, we saw the value of bringing athletes together in an international forum to participate in the game, in sport against each other. And so I think, that it goes beyond just like what we're talking about in the present day situation. And we've seen just time and time again how it breaks down barriers, it breaks down walls. And so I think, it's interesting in talking to government actors, because again, I think sports can kind of be sidelined as a game, right? Like what kids play. But, when you're talking about the level, that you participated at, Chinny, and playing internationally, you saw that. Right now, I'm working closely with the WNBA and the Department of State and a variety of actors on the case of Brittany Griner, who is currently detained in a Russian prison. And so, that it's not just a game. Right. I mean, it gets into a much broader conversation about our world. Exactly. And so I think going back to just being a voice that I feel like I understand the government's point of view, having worked in the government for years, I understand the perspective of having worked at the NBA and, spending time building a network of contacts in other sports leagues and athletes, specifically. One of the great things about my job is that I work directly with the international players in the NBA. And that's a lot of fun, right? Because they tend, you talk about a player who comes a guy like Tacko Fall, right? So Tacko, I've known him since draft night, and I was with him on that night, and he was at the arena in Brooklyn, the Barclays Center, waiting for his name to be called, and then he went to the Celtics, was signed afterward after not being drafted, and then was with the Cavaliers. He recently went through the process to obtain his green card. And so I worked with him kind of through that process all along. And Tacko is an amazing individual, is just like the sweetest human being. And so like to be able to kind of know him personally and know where he came from, and to see him on this journey as he tries to carve out his space as a professional athlete, and then what he wants to do in terms of giving back to his home country of Senegal, like that just encapsulates just how the power and the opportunity to use sports as a force for good.
Well,
and again, it falls back on one of PeacePlayers' core values, which is just seeing people as people. Your ability to be able to build that connection with him drives also your, on a very like minuscule level, your drive to just want to continue to be like, oh, I see this, I have this feeling now, and I want to just keep feeding this feeling in an addictive way, kind of thing. Right.
I'd also link it to culture of collaboration, right? Because you're essentially making a pathway that we can collaborate with the entire world, and we can take ideas from people who have perspectives different than our own, and create a world that's more I guess diversified and inclusive of everyone. So that's amazing.
Well, and the NBA really, I feel like that's exactly that's part of its ethos, right? Is trying to spread the game of basketball globally, but in doing so in a kind of in a way that's not just about bouncing balls, but also about building life skills and empowering women and girls, and going into those various components of sports that are so important to building up young people. We talk about Africa. My first trip, so you had the pandemic, and we were supposed to launch the Basketball Africa League in March of 2020, as you well know, Chinny, and then ultimately had to put that on hold, as we did all sporting activities. Ultimately, we ended up doing a tournament style bubble in Rwanda for the first season of the Basketball Africa League. So my first trip, first time on a plane, first time traveling for work after 18 months, was to go to Rwanda and live in the Radisson Blu for a month. Yeah, absolutely. To help oversee, help work with my colleagues to carry out this first season of the Basketball Africa League. So again, even in the midst of the pandemic, we brought together teams from 12 different countries. And, it was fascinating to see, because you have the Northern Africa teams in that first season. You had the team from Egypt, from Tunisia, from Morocco, but you also had a team from Nigeria. You had a team from Madagascar. You had the host team from Rwanda and Angola. And just like I think we as a society at times can kind of just group Africa, right? As opposed to it being 54 sovereign nations with very different cultures, languages, and belief systems. And so it was really fascinating to see, again, just that on display, with the Egyptian team playing the Malagasy team in one of the games. And it's just like, look at this, like this is sport bringing people together in a setting they never would have been together otherwise. And then those connections are made, because you've got guys who they're young, they're players, they're connecting on social media, they're retweeting each other, and so it's so cool to see that in action. From doing a camp on the ground in the Serengeti to doing it in a more formal setting that's broadcast internationally.
Travis, I'll just say this: if you need anyone to help you with that work, Emmett and I
you got some ideas.
Emmett and I are available at any time to fly anywhere.
We'll bring the cassette tapes and the AM radio back. We'll do AM radio in Rwanda. That would be amazing.
Love it.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much. Emmett, you have something?
Travis, if you have, if you want, where can people find out more about what Jetter is doing and what you're doing, and if people can follow, keep up to dates? This is sort of your time to shine, and let the people know how they can follow and keep tabs on what's going on.
Around the world.
Thank you for that. Jetter Global, JETR jetterglobal.com. Feel free to go there and check us out. And it's still very new. We're building this out. But I'm available at Travis at jetterglobal.com. So happy to engage and interact if anybody wants to communicate. And we're excited to see where this goes, to see the opportunities to continue to play a part in facilitating and participating in conversations around the role of sports in our society, and the tremendous opportunities that exist for the United States to use sports as a catalyst for change, to use it to change people's lives. And so I'm very excited to see where we go from here. And I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you both today.
Absolutely.
No, it's an honor. It was
Awesome.
an honor to talk to you.
Thank you very much. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you both.
And that's it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. If you like what you heard, I always say this, we encourage you to like and subscribe. We've got many more conversations and stories to share in the coming weeks. Invite a friend and leave a review. This is the greatest show on earth. And Emmett truly is the icebreaker king. I mean, there have been many reviews like that, but we'll take more. Emmett, of course, we cannot close this without getting your thoughts.
No. I mean, he was talk about an articulate, just like as we said on the episode, he just gets it. You know what I mean? He gets it. And it was just like those sort of conversations we have. It's just like, it doesn't even feel like work or feel like energy. It's just like we just like are nodding our heads in a continuous motion the whole time. So it's always refreshing to talk to someone. I've never met him, you knew him, but just to see someone who connects so aligned with like all of my morals is like really refreshing.
Right. It is.
Yeah, I hope people check out Jetter. They should. It's really gonna, I think, make an insane difference in the world if you think about it. But you know what else is gonna make an insane difference?
Besides this podcast? I don't know.
In fact, this podcast and PeacePlayers, you can learn more about PeacePlayers by visiting our website at www.peaceplayers.org and following us on social media, mostly at PeacePlayers International and the Play It Forward podcast. That's on Instagram. PeacePlayers International is mostly on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can watch our beautiful faces try to bulldoze our way through questions and the lightning round. And Chinny, I know you're releasing a mixtape on SoundCloud for the Play It Forward. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Maybe someday, bonus content. We don't know. Who knows? But all I know is I finished my coffee.